Hello everyone, welcome to my full DLC walkthrough of the Shadows of Rose DLC for Resident Evil Village on hardcore difficulty, no damage, no crafting, and no weapon parts. And I figured I'd get this done right now since the Shadows of Rose DLC is still pretty young in its age right now. And after I do this walkthrough, I'll upload the final part, or maybe the final two parts of my blind playthrough for the Shadows of Rose DLC. And that will pretty much conclude everything for this piece of shit content. And you heard it right there, guys. This is indeed a piece of shit content. This is probably one of the worst DLCs I have ever played in a Resident Evil game by far. Maybe even the worst Resident Evil DLC by far. And you might be thinking, oh, what about Lost in Nightmares? What about Desperate Escape from Resident Evil 5? Because those DLCs do have some low quality elements to it, but they didn't try to be like this DLC. And so the Lost in Nightmares DLC and the Desperate Escape DLC have to be judged differently to the Shadows of Rose DLC. And I feel like with this one, they had a more ambitious goal in mind with the Shadows of Rose DLC. And because of that ambitious goal, I have to measure up with my critique of this DLC. And that is why I say this is a very crap DLC. And you spend most of this DLC not using your guns pretty much, because this DLC takes some of the worst elements from Resident Evil 1 Remake and it incorporates it into this DLC to deliver a very false, pure survival horror experience. And new Capcom, they didn't market this DLC much during their showcase. Like, they barely showed off any gameplay because their showcase was primarily focused around Resident Evil 4 Remake. But even if Resident Evil 4 Remake wasn't a part of the showcase, they still wouldn't have shown anything from this DLC. And it's because this DLC, if you're just going through it in a professional manner, you can get it done in less than an hour, which is what happened right here. And there was only one restart in this entire recording, and it wasn't because of a failure on my end. It was because I wanted to demonstrate a really funny technique you can do against the Mia doll when you're shrunk down to the size of a mouse. So effectively, I pretty much did this DLC in one go, and if I didn't restart, I would have pretty much gotten a no save as well. And I'm still going to consider this a no save attempt as well, because the restart attempt, I mean, that part was just to showcase something very, very comical and silly, and not because I failed on it or anything. But we're just going through this very boring introduction to the DLC, and I swear to God, guys, you spend at least 9 to 10 minutes going through this introduction without ever getting the chance to use the Lemmy pistol. And another thing as well is that Rose, for whatever reason, is unable to sprint until you encounter the first enemy. And I don't understand why they did this. I would honestly say that this is one of the worst introductions to a Resident Evil game by far. And I'm not going to say it's the worst, because obviously on Infernal difficulty for Resident Evil Revelations, that is probably the worst introduction to a Resident Evil game, if we're talking about this from the context of a hardest difficulty. And speaking of hardest difficulties, contrary to my own beliefs about this DLC doesn't have a difficulty mode above hardcore difficulty, which honestly surprises me, because I expected them to deliver a false experience and then make you play on a higher difficulty to get this so-called true experience, which seems to be the model that they've been favoring with a lot of these Resident Evil games, starting from Resident Evil 7. And in the DLCs for Resident Evil 7, which are infinitely better than this piece of shit DLC, you had to go through the earlier difficulties to unlock the hardest difficulty. On the Not a Hero DLC, you had to unlock professional difficulty. On the End of Zoe DLC, you had to unlock Joe Must Die difficulty. And on Resident Evil 2 Remake, Actually, no, Resident Evil 2 Remake didn't have any difficulties to unlock, now that I think about it. But Resident Evil 3 Remake, you had to unlock Infernal difficulty. And then Resident Evil Village, you had to unlock Village of Shadows difficulty. And for some reason, they decided to favor the Resident Evil 2 Remake format of difficulty design, where the difficulty mode you get at the start is the highest difficulty. There is no higher difficulty above the Shadows of Rose DLC, which I mean, the reason why I expected there to be a higher difficulty above this is because New Capcom was going on and on about this DLC being harder than the main experience. But I'm sorry, guys, that is false advertising, just like what they did for the entire marketing for Resident Evil Village. They deliver very false advertising for a very unpolished and unrefined game that clearly screams limited time and budget put into it. And that same limited time and budget aspect pretty much shows itself throughout this entire DLC. Like, this is the most rushed DLC I have ever played by far. And you're already seeing signs that this DLC was rushed out the door. I mean, for one thing, every single environment you go to in this DLC is just reused from the main experience of Resident Evil Village. So you're running through the exact same areas you went through in Resident Evil Village, only they look slightly different, and that's it. And it's not just with environments, they also reuse objectives from the main experience of Resident Evil Village. Like, remember how in Castle Dimitrescu, the whole objective of Castle Dimitrescu was to just get those 4 masks? Well, you're doing the exact same thing in this castle area for this DLC. You're trying to find these 3 masks, and you're just placing them on statues to gain access to a key item. It's just completely reused from Castle Dimitrescu. And then with Beneviento's area, the concept of what they were trying to go for with Beneviento's area for this DLC are the exact same ideas that went into Beneviento's area for Resident Evil Village, with like the lights going out, you lose all your weapons, you're going through a very scripted scenario. Only this time, I feel they just made it worse for Beneviento's area. I'll talk more about it when I get the chance. But these are the face eaters. This is really like one of 2 enemy types that you're encountering in this DLC pretty much. And I mean it, guys, 2 enemy types. And the only 2 enemy types you'll ever be encountering in this DLC are these face eaters and a brute. But the brute, you might as well just make him negligible as an enemy type because he only appears in very specific scenarios. He's not a pursuer, but thank God that's not the case because New Capcom has just been reusing this pursuer design way too much in their Resident Evil games. And at least this is a nice change of pace from that really stupid pursuer design. But I mean it, guys, like 2 enemy types. That's all there is to it with this DLC. And I'm not even going to count the dolls because the dolls feel more like an obstacle than an actual enemy type. And they put these face eaters in environments that don't suit the whole idea of pure survival horror. And, you know, I don't understand this as well. Like, I've seen a lot of people praise this DLC as being amazing. Even 2 of my subscribers have called this DLC amazing. And I'm just like, what the fuck are you guys talking about? And at least I'm seeing eye to eye with Ether. Ether said that this DLC was underwhelming and shit, and at least we are on the same page with that. But my other 2 subscribers, how can you possibly like this DLC when this feels more like an alpha than anything else? It completely misrepresents the very idea of pure survival horror design if it's going to be favoring very shit AI systems, badly designed environments that don't suit the enemy types whatsoever, not to mention you're using exploits like crazy. I'm not even going to talk about the ammunition design because I think the ammunition is fine on this game, but you know, there's no recent use crafting whatsoever in this DLC because you get plenty of ammunition and you're just going to be running past so many enemies. And it's not because they're intimidating, it's not because they're dangerous or anything, it's just because they're a waste of time to fight, especially when the face eaters, they don't have any of the stun systems that were in Resident Evil Village. And that's not really saying much because Resident Evil Village's enemies didn't have any stuns whatsoever on Village of Shadows difficulty. But considering that this is hardcore difficulty, you'd expect there to be some kind of creativity with the flinch animations, but you only get that with the shotgun. At least the shotgun knocks over the face eaters, but you're only going to be using the shotgun on 1 face eater. The rest of the enemies, you're just running past them. There is no incentive to partake in the combat, and when the enemies are placed in such a way that they have just as much value as what it would be like if they didn't exist in the first place, can you really call that creative enemy design? Can you really call this pure survival horror design? And right now, this room right here is the perfect representation of why this DLC doesn't satisfy the pure survival horror aspect whatsoever. I mean, we get past this guy, so the sprint counter is back in this DLC, so you can sprint into these enemies and bait out their grab. And we've also gained access to the ability to disrupt the auto-inducers on the sclerotia in order to trigger biocrystallization and destroy the mold permeating from them. But it's meaningless right now because we don't have the ability to freeze enemies yet, and that move isn't that reliable. It's only useful in very specific scenarios. But this right here, what's the whole point in wasting time shooting these enemies? I mean, right here, this is an exploit. So, because I stood beyond that door just then, I went behind an invisible barrier that stops the enemies from getting to me. It's the same tech from Resident Evil 2 Remake, and also in Resident Evil Village. And considering how much this DLC just forces enemies down your throat in certain situations, and you're speedrunning like crazy, and certain situations work better if you're just speedrunning like the entire thing, you're just rushing like crazy. Like, this entire DLC is tailored towards speedrunners, and it really shows with the lacking quality and the lacking creativity in so many parts of this DLC. This is why I hate games that are designed for speedrunning, because they're never creative with their designs. They never go all out with complex designs like Resident Evil 7 or anything like that. It's just very bare bones gameplay, and it feels even more stripped down and outdated. Like, even Ether said, the way they place the enemies, the way they make you save your ammunition, the way you just run past enemies all the time because they're dumb, the way the environments are designed, it's all part of an outdated philosophy. Like, this feels like 1990s gameplay, but it's releasing in 2022. And it's so fucking retarded on so many levels. You're seeing just how shit the enemies are designed. And it's just, there's no reason to waste ammunition on these enemies. They're that basic. And they even give you the ability to freeze the enemies using Rose's abilities once you gain access to the second amplifier. And at that point, like, you can go through this entire castle area and get to the boss fight against the Brute without ever having to fire your weapons, aside from, like, one shot from the, I mean, you do have to kill this guy, though, because this guy can be very awkward if you leave him alive, because you have to backtrack through this hallway, and he's in your way, and it can be very, very clunky. But aside from killing that guy, and using the shotgun against a face eater when you're playing that really stupid game that the Duke set up for you, where you have to find the right sclerotia, you can pretty much go through the entire castle area without ever firing your weapons and just using some of Rose's abilities, and that's it. And you might be thinking, oh, this is part of the pure survival horror design. It's there to make you strategically save up on your ammunition, but you don't do it like this. I mean, Resident Evil 7, the enemies had reasons to be where they were. You weren't just blindly running past them only because they were badly designed or because they didn't complement the environment correctly. And the percentage of time you were running past the enemies, it was like 5 to 10% or something like that. But in this DLC, you might as well just make it where you're running past like 95% of the enemies, it feels like. That's just it. And you could honestly market this DLC as just being like a horror simulator like Outlast, where you don't give Rose any weapons whatsoever. She only has her Mega Mycete slash Medomycete abilities, or whatever the fuck they are, because it's so unclear as to whether Rose was born with her abilities or Miranda did something to her, because like going down either route, there's like lore inconsistencies. I'm not gonna get into that, but like, they don't make the weapons stand out in any sort of way. They don't make any of the designs that accommodate pure survival horror stand out in any sort of way. And you want to call this amazing? I mean, look at this. I'm just running past the enemies. I mean, I did have to use my Mega Mycete abilities, or whatever the fuck this is, like Rose's abilities, in order to, like, freeze the enemies. That's fine. But, like, you know, you can spend, like, 95% of this castle area just running past the enemies blindly, and it's just so lazy, and it just leads to a very stagnant experience. It's just, stagnation really kicks in, it just becomes very stale, it becomes very repetitive, it becomes very lazy. It's like, think of Occam's Razor, when these enemies are going to have, like, the same amount of impact as not being there in the first place. That's what it feels like most of the time, and you neglect so many other aspects with pure survival horror design when you design this entire DLC, or any kind of experience like this, as, like, it's an alpha. This feels like a fucking alpha. Like, it feels like there are so many untested ideas, like, there's a lot of lacking potential displayed with this DLC. And it's just, you can tell, like, with how much they just reuse, like, so many ideas, or they just make everything feel so stripped down and bare bones and so uninteresting. I mean, this is like Resident Evil 2 Remake all over again, or like Resident Evil 1 Remake. I don't know what's worse, this DLC or Resident Evil 1 Remake slash Resident Evil 2 Remake. I honestly don't know what to say, and when a development team is going to put me in that kind of situation, you can definitely tell this DLC has issues. And we're making our way down here. After doing this really dumb puzzle. I mean, what is the whole point of these fucking puzzles? Like, I don't understand what puzzles have to do with surviving or with horror, but they're just here to just drag out the gameplay. They're just here to hide the fact that this DLC does absolutely nothing with its gameplay, and it all just feels like cinematic stuff, this and that. It's just this is so fucking lame. Like people have no taste. People have just not played anything better if they think this DLC is amazing. And I don't understand my subscribers as well when they're calling this amazing. In fact, one of my subscribers, he likes Resident Evil 7, but I cannot rationalize a scenario where you can like Resident Evil 7 and like this piece of shit content. That's so crap. And I would honestly give this DLC like a 1.5 out of 10 or a 2 out of 10. And the parts that I do like about this DLC do nothing to increase that score by much. Oh, and also right here, here's the Brute. So the pathing on this guy is always the same, and I had to run back to the crawl space because he spotted me while I was busy disrupting the auto-inducers on the Sclerotia. And by the way, that second Sclerotia that gives the pipe bomb, you need to make sure you destroy that because you need to go through that pathway that was opened up when you actually destroyed that Sclerotia, when you are backtracking back through this area. And right here, you just got to make sure you get past the Brute, and then you need to use your powers/abilities on this Sclerotia before this guy gets the chance to get up and grab you. And don't waste time with that vase, and then there's a second pipe bomb right over here. You need to make sure you grab both of these pipe bombs before you grab the silver mask. And when you're backtracking, you're going to notice some very strange behavior, and I discovered a lot of this in my blind playthrough on my first try. But right here, you've got to take this path to grab the sprig of white sage. It's best to go this way because this guy never attacks. If you go down the path I just took, this guy never attacks. And then right here, you're about to see some really silly scripting, and this goes to show just how incompetent the developers were when designing the enemy placements. But I'm just going to push past this guy, and the Face Eaters do not have any back grabs or side grabs, like in Resident Evil 2 Remake, so you can just push past that guy, and then the next guy just stumbles every single time, so you can get past him. And sometimes the Brute can catch up to you, and he'll hit you when you're in the crawl space. This happened to me in my blind playthrough, and it was fucking retarded. So for whatever reason, they didn't make it where the moment you go in that crawl space, the enemy's de-aggro. So you've got to get through the crawl space as fast as possible before that Brute hits you. And then right here, I recommend standing by these words because Michael is going to give you handgun ammo and also a bunch of white sage. And yeah, there's two different white sages. You have a sprig of white sage and a bunch of white sage. A sprig of white sage only restores 2 of your abilities, like 2 of your cores basically. And a bunch of white sage will fully restore Rose's abilities. Getting a bunch of white sage before Miranda is very important because you can easily speed through Miranda if you have like sprig of white sages and bunch of white sages. I mean, even without the sprig of white sage or the bunch of white sage, Miranda is still a very fun fight. And this is also a reason why I wanted to post this walkthrough before getting into my blind playthrough. Because at the time during my blind playthrough, I didn't really like Miranda because I didn't really understand a lot of the designs put in place with certain abilities and with certain designs. And so I was a bit harsh towards Miranda, and I just wanted to get this walkthrough out here to inform you guys that how I felt towards Miranda during my blind playthrough is not how I feel about her right now. Like, I would honestly say Miranda in this DLC, she's a fight designed by old Capcom. Old Capcom definitely surfaced at the end of this DLC, and it has been so long since I've actually seen anything from old Capcom, and the last time they resurfaced was during Heisenberg's boss fight in the main experience of Resident Evil Village, because that fight is a masterpiece. It is perfect for Resident Evil Village's systems. And then this fight is just so creative. Like, it takes advantage of really cool systems, and you have the ability to use the Mega Mycete against Miranda and stun her, and there's a lot of skill involved with Miranda's fight. I mean, Ether doesn't like it, but I don't really understand why. He says the fight's not challenging enough, but, there's a fine line between wanting something to be even more challenging and actually, like, being satisfied with the end result. And if they put more thought into Miranda's boss fight, it would have been a shit fight. Like, they knew when to stop when actually designing Miranda's boss fight, and they delivered a really fun experience that is far better than anything else in this DLC, honestly. And it's a good thing as well that Miranda is designed the way she is, because Fighting her in the main experience, Resident Evil Village, she has some pretty poor designs, and the room is very small, so it's so easy to get caught against the wall when you're trying to deal with Miranda. But they fixed a lot of those issues with Miranda's boss fight in this DLC, and that is wonderful. But right here, we get the triocular key and we get the shotgun. I should be excited by the fact that the shotgun actually feels like a shotgun on hardcore difficulty for this DLC compared to how it was in the main experience on Village of Shadows difficulty for Resident Evil Village. But considering how boring and stale and stagnant this entire DLC is, and with how much you're just running past the enemies, the shotgun just doesn't have a lot of weight to it. It doesn't feel that good of a weapon. It doesn't feel that exciting to use. Yeah, it's just very generic, and I don't get any kind of feelings from using it. Yeah, that's pretty much like the perfect way to sum up my experiences with Shadows of Rose. I felt nothing for like so much of the DLC, and I still feel nothing to this day. Like, I honestly don't know what to feel about this DLC aside from just being very negative and just hating a lot of the objective flaws with the Shadows of Rose DLC. I mean, there are people saying it is unremarkable, and thank God for those people, but I've just seen so many people saying this DLC is amazing, but what generation do you people come from? Like, does this trigger, like, nostalgic vibes from your 90s era where you're playing those kind of games? And that's why it's amazing for you, because of the nostalgia aspect? Because if so, that is fucking retarded on so many levels if you're going to be basing your critique around nostalgia. Like, get a fucking life if you think this DLC is amazing. I mean, I swear to God, like, this is... If people are going to be praising this DLC so much, then most likely new Capcom is going to listen to their idiotic fan base and just make the next Resident Evil experience a lot like this, just very bare bones and basic, and not even trying to do anything important. This might as well have been made by the Silent Hill development team. Like, the Silent Hill development team, every single Silent Hill game is shit, and they never try to make their games interesting. It's always just mindlessly shooting everything, nothing flinches, and yeah, it's very boring gameplay. Like, everything has so much life on the highest difficulty for the Silent Hill series. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if, like, some elements of the Silent Hill team were in this development team at new Capcom. And fuck this director, like, this director who handled this DLC for Resident Evil Village did a really shit job. I'm really insulted that he even had a hand in this DLC. And, you know, it's made me even more reluctant to like Resident Evil 4 Remake, because I imagine Resident Evil 4 Remake might be the same. And I've even seen some gameplay, like some additional gameplay that wasn't covered in the showcase for Resident Evil 4 Remake, and I noticed instances where the Ganado weren't flinching from Leon's shots, so most likely Resident Evil 4 Remake is going to favor a Village of Shadows-esque difficulty mode, where everything is dictated by arbitrary damage values, even with stuns, and it's just going to be a shit experience. You're just going to be running past the enemies mindlessly, just without any form of thought whatsoever. It's going to feel more like a marathon than an actual game. And that's the perfect way to describe this DLC. It just feels more like a marathon, just mindlessly running past everything. Like, that's not what pure survival horror is. Pure survival horror, if you're going to be ignoring so many of the fundamental aspects to pure survival horror, it's not pure survival horror. Like, you're ignoring so many different aspects with this DLC because there's no reason to indulge with them. It's just so pointless. And once again, if you've been spoiled by better pure survival horror experiences like Resident Evil 7, then you should not be liking this DLC. But yeah, people, they just have very weird tastes for this kind of stuff, and it seriously boggles the mind that anyone could be satisfied with this alpha of a DLC. And guess what, guys? We've reached the end of the castle area. Yeah. Did everything I did seem very engaging? Did everything I did seem like it was worthy of pure survival horror titles or anything like that? Or any of that other bullshit that I don't bother basing these games around? Don't you fucking tell me that this is somehow representative of a pure survival horror experience. Don't give me that bullshit, please. I'm sorry that I have to be brutally honest with you guys, but this is what I have to do as a Resident Evil player, and I have to dispel a lot of these absurd claims regarding this DLC. And right now, we're about to make our way over to this boss fight with the Brute, but we have to do some very obtuse triggering right over here. You have to examine the crystal before it lets you put in the mask, and then you gotta go one by one placing these masks and watching these scripted animations and camera work. It's just a waste of time. You didn't have to put up with this. when you're replacing the mass in the main experience. Why it's like this, I don't know. But this boss fight against the Brute is very, very boring. It is so unimaginative. It is so unoriginal. This boss, he just uses a lot of the same moveset from Aureus. Yeah, he's just straight up Aureus. That's all it is. So can you really call this a new enemy type if he's just Aureus? Every single move he does is Aureus's moveset. That's it. Every single fucking move he does, aside from a couple of attacks involving teleporting, but it all leads up into a similar looking animation to existing moves that Aureus has. And at least compared to the other Aureus bosses, this guy actually flinches because I'm on hardcore difficulty and aiming for the core actually does something. So every 3 shots with the shotgun, he will always flinch, and you can even shoot him while he's in the flinch animation to contribute to damage to his stun HP, which is good. But this still doesn't change the fact that this is so uninspired, so uninteresting, so boring, so stale, so fucking repetitive. Like, they reused assets from Resident Evil Village once again to make this pathetic fight. And you can't even do anything creative with dodging. Like, the only form of, like, dodging, which is just avoiding his attacks, is just running past him when he does his slam moves. And this grab move of his, there's nothing you can do against that grab. You have to pretty much run away from it at all times because you can't strategically crouch under it at the right moment in order to avoid it, which would have been very engaging gameplay. You just have to run away from everything because that's somehow engaging gameplay. It's so fucking lame. And this phase right here, the Brute is going to have less life for this phase because he's going to do nothing but this one running attack. And the game wants you to use your abilities against him because trying to avoid this running attack, I don't know what the developers were expecting you to do, but I did find a way to bait out the running attack. So you got to make sure that you have room to run on the right-hand side of where you are. So this is the best spot to stand, and you just got to run at the right moment so that he misses with his swings, and he's just going to be doing the same combo that's reused from Aureus once again. I'm not going to use my abilities just yet because I want to stun him with the shotgun. Now that he's stunned, I am going to use my abilities in order to freeze him for a bit, and then lay everything I have into that weak spot. Eventually he's going to get out of it, which is really stupid. So right here, because of the fact that I made him flinch and I reached the threshold for his stun HP, it got him out of that major stun, which is something I don't like. I hate the fact that you can cancel him out of that hard stun by triggering the minor stun. That's really dumb. But he goes away, and you see right there, he has less life, like I've already mentioned, so a couple of shotgun shells and some pistol bullets is enough to end this phase, which is badly designed, because there's no creativity involved with that phase, and what new Capcom was expecting you to do for that phase, I don't know what any normal person would ever do about that move, because he's going to be so close to you when he just rushes towards you, and you can't dodge the first hit that he does. And you know, him running at you at the speed that he's going at, it should warrant crouching. Like, that makes a lot of sense just on an objective level, but no, you have to position yourself so that there's space to run on the right and then run away from him at the right moment. Like, how can you call that like logical or like reasonable design? Like, how can you call that believable? I don't understand that. But now we have this, so just use your abilities on him, just constantly freeze him and aim for his back. Once again, 3 shotgun shells is enough to stun him, and whenever he teleports, you're not going to be able to stun him with your abilities, but the first time he teleports, he's going to try to do the slam on you, so you gotta stand where I was when I was trying to avoid the slam, and that will allow you to predict where he is, and depending on where he is, if he's very close to you and you're in a position where you can run around his attack, you've got to run to the left, like towards his right-hand side, and that will work. See right here, I'm going to be able to run to his right-hand side, and you got to make sure you don't run too early because his tracking doesn't really make any sense, because at times you run a little too early and he still tracks you, but if you just stand still and you run at the right moment, his tracking is disabled for some reason. And also, whenever the Duke says enough dilly-dallying, it means he's going to try to do this move where he summons a lot of Liquid Void, which is not that dangerous, because Liquid Void doesn't instantly kill you or damage you. It's an area of effect, pretty much. Just don't step in the lava, which is what a lot of the obstacles and enemies feel like in this game. Yeah, just boring obstacles, just boring hurdles that you just jump over like you're in a fucking Olympic. It's just that. And I remember the marketing for the DLC, and they were like, the world itself will actually feel like your enemy, and I predicted perfectly. that it was just going to be, oh, don't touch the floor, it's made out of lava, this and that. Yeah, just dumb stuff like that. And similarly with the marketing, when they were just talking about Rose removing her abilities as being the primary motivation for the character in this DLC, why the hell would you set up Rose's abilities in the main story of Resident Evil Village if you're then going to remove them in the DLC? And furthermore, she doesn't even remove them at the end of the DLC. So, like, the Purifying Crystal, which is what she's trying to get in this DLC, and the Purifying Crystal by itself already feels like a MacGuffin, and it feels like something that belongs in a fantasy game, and it's introduced out of the blue. And it turns out, like, the K that we actually see, that's actually K9. K9, who was that character that Rose was with at the start of the DLC, that was actually fake because somehow Miranda was able to manipulate Rose's perception of the world from within the Mega Mycete, even though Rose was in the real world. How the hell did that work? And, like, how on earth would Miranda even know to use K in order to influence Rose? How the hell did she know that? And how did she even get K's genetic data? How's that possible? That doesn't make any sense at all. But just continuing on with this point, like, the fact that Rose just destroys the Purifying Crystal at the end of the DLC further confirms that the Purifying Crystal is a fucking MacGuffin, and just like with Occam's Razor, it achieves the same result as what it would have been had the Purifying Crystal never existed. And once again, this whole idea of removing the Mutamycete from her body, like, the Purifying Crystal, that's what its purpose is, but you already have a better established plot device, which is the cure from the end of Zoe DLC, which isn't so much of a MacGuffin, because the BSAA/Blue Umbrella, they collaborated on this project with actually creating a cure for the E-type Mutamycete, and they used the Connections research. This took weeks of research to actually develop that cure, from the end of Resident Evil 7 all the way to the beginning of the end of Zoe DLC. So why didn't she just use the cure for the E-type Mutamycete on herself if she's so driven to actually remove her abilities because of the fact that they were manifesting at the wrong moments and she had no control over it, and they were manifesting in minor ways where, like, white mold would sprout from her body, and this caused her to be bullied a lot because everyone kept calling her a freak, and apparently she's still being bullied, like, all the way through high school. And why would the BSAA even put Rose in public school? I mean, not only is she infectious, I mean, even though Chris says that apparently her mold isn't infectious, which is very confusing, but the Connections are surely looking for her. I mean, they established that the Connections know about Rose. Like, it was that mole that was working for the Connections, the mole that was based within the BSAA, that revealed Rose's existence to Miranda. And I would guess that alongside the Connections, there are other terrorist organizations that might exploit Rose's abilities. But, like, the BSAA still put her into public school. I mean, the BSAA was so insistent upon Ethan and Mia moving to Romania to actually hide out there so that the Connections couldn't find them. Yet they're a little bit more liberal with Rose for some reason, for like 16 years. And speaking of the BSAA, the whole plot element with the BSAA being evil in Resident Evil Village, because they were a corrupt and rotten organization as listed in the concept art, and based on the fact that they were releasing bioweapons, like they were actually using BOWs to try to get a sample of the Mega Mycete, and that actually worked in the end because for some reason the Mega Mycete is around even though Ethan Winters blew it up, and it's never explained how on earth the Mega Mycete is still around for Rose to connect to. Is that sample of the Mega Mycete even under the BSAA's possession? Like, what has happened to the BSAA 16 years after Resident Evil Village? Are they still around? Have they disbanded? Similar to what happened with Umbrella, where they just completely disbanded? Or, like, they just completely fell apart, like their stocks fell after people realized that they were in the business of producing bioorganic weapons? Like, what has happened to the BSAA? They've never explained this. We know Chris is still operating. We know the Hound Wolf Squad is still around. What the hell has happened to the BSAA? Like, it just feels like this DLC, in order to even implement this idea of a DLC, they had to scrap a lot of the plot elements that they set up back in Resident Evil Village just to make this work. Yet, this whole idea of a DLC taking place 16 years after the events of the main game, this feels like something that should warrant its own game. Why the hell would you set a DLC 16 years after the events of Resident Evil Village to get this very poor conclusion to Rose's arc and all these moments with the storytelling just going nowhere? And like I said before, there is no story to this DLC. Everything that happens within this consciousness of the Megamycete is just rendered null and void. I mean, Rose is more accepting of her abilities. Like, everything that happened within the consciousness of the Megamycete didn't exactly change her status whatsoever in the real world. In fact, it still confused me in my blind playthrough, the idea of using a purifying crystal that is basically made from the fragments and consciousness of individuals who know about it. Like, how does using the purifying crystal in this realm of consciousness affect Rose's body in the real world? That doesn't make any fucking sense. And it seems New Capcom agrees with me because, like I said, at the end of the DLC, Rose completely shatters the purifying crystal in order to save Ethan, her father. So they pretty much confirmed that this whole idea of the purifying crystal is just Occam's razor. Like, so many of these ideas are just rendered null and void. And speaking of ideas, we now have Beneviento section, and I don't like the start to Beneviento section. It's only the start of Beneviento section I dislike. I like the middle part. The ending with Evelyn, I don't understand at all. But this beginning part is all just reusing ideas from the main experience of Resident Evil Village, where the lights turn off, you lose all of your weapons. In this case, Rose loses her weapons and her abilities because she doesn't have any power. And we're just repeating the same objectives of interacting with certain objects, and we have to get a fuse, so they've reused this objective from Beneviento's area, and then we have this. So this right here is completely uninspired and uninteresting gameplay. Once again, they are basically redoing a trope that so many other forms of media have just replicated many, many times. This is meant to be some homage to Doctor Who with the Weeping Angels, where they move when you're not looking at them, but they stop moving if you look at them. But don't trust that, because the amount of times I have been grabbed by a mannequin, even when they're within camera view because they're right behind me, is dumb. And Nicer9, one of my subscribers, mentioned that you can just run past the mannequins, and apparently he did that his first playthrough, which I don't understand. But it is true, you can actually run past all of these mannequins without any hassle, because they're that throwaway. Let's just make it where we just run right past them. On the one hand, I can appreciate that I'm able to speed through this trash section as quickly as possible, but on the other hand, this is once again another case of Occam's razor, where this is just a throwaway idea. They don't even try to make this whole mechanic stand out and just make it so easy to just run right past them. But I'm much rather favor the former option, because I hate that section. I hate how uninspired it is. I hate how much it's just repeating a tiresome trope from Doctor Who. But we've done that dumb part, that very tiresome part, and now we have this, which I do like. There is a charm to this sequence, and I love the music as well. Like, this is a very whimsical sequence, and the music gives me vibes of Nightmare Before Christmas. I mean, I've never watched the film, but that's the movie I would think of when I'm actually thinking of this, because this feels like music you would listen to if you were inside of your house, it was nighttime, and it was winter. That's what it feels like. And this part, it's interesting, you know, like sneaking past these dolls and then hearing the music. Like, it's a fun sequence. It's not meant to be that remotely engaging. It's just there for like a whimsical feel to it, and I do like that. That's the only part to Beneviento's area that I like. Or I guess we can call it Evelyn's area now, because I don't even know why Evelyn is inside of the Megamycete, or why she bothered to take control of Beneviento's area. I mean, in the latter question, I mean, Beneviento was like a child, and she liked dolls, so I guess it would make sense for Evelyn to reign over Beneviento's area, because, you know, they're both children, and, you know, like, I imagine they're like minds, basically, with their childish behavior and their psychopathy. But for the former question, it doesn't make any sense how Evelyn is here. She wasn't absorbed into the Megamycete. Like she formed her own hive mind from the E-type Mutamycete, which is an artificially created Mutamycete. It apparently is like 99 point something percent similar to the natural Mutamycete generated by the Megamycete. But like the network that Evelyn created was based in America, but somehow Evelyn is connecting to the consciousness of the Megamycete a continent away, and she's somehow here. How is that possible? I mean, I understand that Miranda did research and she was helping the connections create Evelyn. She was even featured in the photos that we see in her laboratory when we're playing as Chris in that part of the Resident Evil village. Like, she was holding baby Evelyn, but that still doesn't explain how Evelyn is here. And another thing that really doesn't make any sense is Evelyn's inclusion within this DLC doesn't feel substantial, and for the most part, Evelyn feels like a negligible plot device. If you were to remove Evelyn from this entire DLC, nothing would change. Nothing at all. Like, Evelyn's presence within this DLC does nothing to add to the story. Like, they don't establish Evelyn in a way that is interesting, or in a way that actually feels crucial to her being within this consciousness of the Megamycete. So it's a throwaway plot device. It doesn't serve any purpose. So why is Evelyn here? It doesn't make any sense. Oh, and this is the part where I restarted, so this is where I'm demonstrating that you can just straight up run past Mia, but do not go near the wall on the right. I know you're probably tempted to just hide behind the wall in order to stop that doll of Mia from grabbing you, but she will actually grab you through the geometry, and by taking the path exactly like how I did it, that doll of Mia will never be able to grab you. It was very funny. I just decided to do that because, you know, I've been doing stupid stuff like that throughout this entire DLC. Why not just do that? And it actually worked. And I had to restart a couple of times, like the first time I discovered this, but for this recording, it was only one time that I restarted. And once again, it was not because I failed the sequence, it was because I was originally going to hide behind the seat, as Carcinogen SCA did in this walkthrough, but then I remembered I wanted to showcase that method, so that's why I restarted. So I'm still going to call this a no-save attempt at this DLC, which paid off in the end. But this right here, you have to stun that doll with your abilities, and then you need to trigger the doll of Mia to come, and then hide behind that countertop, wait for the doll of Mia to path to the right, and then move. And then I take this path because this is what Carcinogen SCA did, because I thought I could replicate this path to actually speed up the sequence, but I was a little slow, because the doll was not in the right position for me to speed this up. But we've done this, and now we just have to run away from this doll of Mia. And apparently there is a bug on the PC version if you're playing at a high frame rate. If you're on PC and you play this DLC at a frame rate that is not 60, the doll of Mia will be so fast you will never be able to get through the door. It will move unbelievably fast. So, yeah, it's just the kind of crap you have to deal with PC gaming, but I don't have to deal with that because I'm a console gamer, and console gaming has never failed me once, aside from, you know, like Batman Arkham Origins or other games in like the PS3 era where the frame rate is so shit, it is so hard to play the games. It makes the experiences unplayable pretty much. And thank God PCs don't have to deal with that kind of problem with Batman Arkham Origins, but it's sad to hear that. And now we have this. So this is one of my favorite moments from the DLC, getting the chance to go back into Ethan's house and actually explore his memories and get some new dialogue. Like, I cannot tell you how excited I was to hear that the legend had returned in this DLC. And, you know, I thought it was just voice lines we were going to be hearing from Ethan, but he actually returns in the end of the DLC, which is awesome. I mean, it still doesn't make any sense how he's here. And, you know, like, Miranda mentioned in her journal at the end of this DLC that only those who have been attuned to the Mutamycete for life can actually maintain their mental faculties. But Ethan wasn't exposed to the Mutamycete at birth. He was exposed to it for 3 years, and yet he's somehow in this consciousness of the Megamycete. And how was he even absorbed into the consciousness of the Megamycete? He wasn't anywhere near the Megamycete when he detonated the N2 explosives, unless there was some traces of Mutamycete around, but it wasn't exactly Mutamycete that was directly connected to the Megamycete. So how is that possible? Like, we didn't see any kind of moment where Ethan's body is literally absorbed into the Megamycete, so how is he here? And how is he maintaining his mental faculties if Miranda literally says in her journal at the end of the DLC that only those who have been attuned to the mutamycete for life can maintain their mental faculties? And a lot of the journals that they give you at the end of the DLC are just filled with a lot of inconsistencies and a lot of confusion because like Miranda is trying to create a vessel again for Ava within this consciousness, but like what's the point? And just the way Miranda phrases it, it's like she wants to influence the real world, like she wants to bring herself and the vessel for Ava into the real world, but she can't do that. Yet a lot of her dialogue that is written within that journal would imply that she's trying to influence the real world, and it doesn't make any sense. And apparently she's found out a way to measure consciousness, and apparently she created the masked Duke from multiple different consciousness, like different consciousness just merged together to create the masked Duke for some reason. How is that possible? And how did she even measure that? How the hell do you measure consciousness? It's not like you can just measure it via a blood sample or a urine sample. Like, those are at least measurable samples. But how the hell do you measure consciousness? Like, she said she readjusted the threads or something. Like, whatever the hell that means. Like, Miranda's plan doesn't make any sense. And just the way she was able to manipulate Rose, who was in the real world, from the realm of consciousness, how the hell did she do that? And why create an apparition of K? How did she know that? It's so confusing. The storytelling in this DLC is of a similar level of confusion as the main game with Resident Evil Village. But now we have this boss fight against Evelyn, which it's a gimmick fight. So just like with Beneviento's fight, you're just going to be approaching it in one specific way that doesn't involve any kind of problems. So Evelyn always teleports to the same locations. It's always the same order, and you have to wait until she has like a breakdown like that, and when she unleashes the 3 wind blasts in rapid succession, she's going to be weakened for a bit. And then once she's weakened, you just hold R1 on her, and you will drain some of her health. On my blind playthrough, this fight was a little confusing because I didn't realize Evelyn was on a scripted order, and it was scripted when she would actually do these attacks. I thought it was random, and so there were a lot of moments where I was getting hit, but that's just part of the confusion with a blind playthrough. But now that I realize it's a gimmick fight, it's not so bad. I mean, I know a lot of people will complain about this fight, how much it's a gimmick fight, but it's a psychological horror sequence. I mean, you have no weapons, you have no means of defending yourself. It has to be simple to accommodate that gameplay aspect with the player not having anything. That's just what psychological horror games do. I mean, aside from the Evil Within, of course. I mean, like, Silent Hill does that all the time, though, where they have, like, non-gameplay elements with their boss fights, this and that. And it's pretty shit in that game series. But for this part, you have to destroy the 2 Sclerotia that are blocking the stairway, and then you have to wait until Evelyn does the triple wind blast before you're able to get up here. And then when you get over to this spot, you need to wait until she's finished doing her wind blasts before you're able to go on to the next cover point. And once you get to the next cover point and you suppress Evelyn's power again, that will be the end of the fight. And you will never see Evelyn again. So her presence in this DLC has no worth whatsoever. She's so insubstantial and so throwaway in this DLC. Her existence doesn't make any sense. She doesn't interfere in the final boss fight. She doesn't do anything like that. And Miranda knows about her interference, but did she interfere when saving Rose from Miranda the first time around? 16 years ago, or is she interfering with the process of making Rose clones? Like, the journal never makes this clear. Evelyn was so unnecessary for this game. There was no reason to include her whatsoever. And now we're moving on to the final part of the DLC. And look at that. Castle area and Beneviento's area, and we're already on the final boss fight. That is so rushed on so many levels. You don't do a section like Beneviento's area and then go to the final boss immediately. That just doesn't seem right at all. That is just very strange pacing. And speaking of Beneviento's area, I forgot to mention this, but one of the main reasons why I don't like that sequence where you're dealing with the mannequins and that Doctor Who sequences, there's no psychological significance to anything. There's nothing that allows you to relate to Rose. I mean, we're getting all this background information on Catherine, Lucy, and Jimmy, those three kids that bullied her, but why would you want to use those kinds of insignificant characters in order to try to frame some kind of puzzle around them to then make us connect to Rose? Like, that whole entire sequence did not make me connected to Rose whatsoever. Like, in Resident Evil Village, in the main experience, Ethan taking on that baby, that deformed version of Rose, is not only significant to him, but it allows you to connect more with him. I mean, the whole point of Resident Evil Village is that he's trying to save his daughter. And, you know, as a father, it is a great fear to see your child's innocence stripped away like that. And, you know, the baby version of Rose, like that demented baby we encountered in Beneviento's area, was a way of representing that kind of fear a parent has. And, you know, like, Beneviento knew that Ethan was going after Rose, and she knows that Ethan is Rose's father, and so she used that to her advantage in order to create this deformed version of Rose that would attack Ethan. And you know, it was a really great way to, you know, connect better with Ethan Winters and really understand the struggle he was going through with trying to save Rose. And, you know, I feel like Rose was built up better as just that kind of plot device with being saved by Ethan, rather than here, where the mechanisms that they're trying to use to make you connect to Rose in Beneviento's section are just so lame. And what kind of psychological significance are you presenting when you're showing those doll versions of Jimmy, Catherine, and Lucy, and then that Doctor Who Mia doll? Like, what is the psychological connection to Rose? I don't understand. There is no underlying thematic device right there, like there was with the demented baby from Beneviento's area from the main experience of Resident Evil Village. Like, this doesn't work with Beneviento's section in this DLC, and it's bad. It's just not very good. And now I'm just going to stop right there. That's all I have to say about that. Now we're with Ethan Winters, the legend back in his glory, and he's rescuing Rose. And all of this precedes the penultimate showdown with Miranda, which is really fun in this DLC. And like I said before, it is definitely designed by old Capcom. And Rose will be able to gain access to 2 new abilities once she's actually restored her full potential. So she will have the ability to dodge, where you gotta strafe and then press circle. She will also have the ability to essentially absorb Miranda's projectiles by pressing L1 in order to block. And the timing is pretty good, and I like the way it's designed. And then you'll have the ability to do Rose's most powerful attack, which is to summon the Mega Mycete in order to stun Miranda and do a huge amount of damage to her. That is a really fun move to experiment with, and it can interrupt Miranda in all sorts of attack animations. That being said, Miranda does gain some iframes during very specific animations, so you've got to recognize the points where she returns back into a neutral state so that she is susceptible to the Mega Mycete attack. And also, the Mega Mycete attack will consume 3 of your cores. So you've got to be very mindful of that when you are trying to use your cores. And that right there was unfortunate. So I thought I could spawn attack Miranda by using the Mega Mycete attack, but she backed up and she was able to get out of it. Yeah, that's another random factor to consider when you're trying to use the Mega Mycete. Miranda can dodge randomly, and there's no telling when she chooses to do it. And that was a stun just then, so I reached this damage threshold where she's going to be using her projectile attacks. And a lot of the times, when you're getting close to Miranda, when she's flying around like this, she tries to get away from you. And you've got to prepare for the projectile. The timing on the absorption is really good. And when you absorb that projectile, you will restore 2 of your cores. But using the Mega Mycete, I stunned her, and I only used the shotgun on Miranda when she's stunned. And I think you do more damage when she's in that stunned state. I'm not really sure. I mean, I'm basing it on the special effects playing when you're actually dealing damage to her. Like, there's literal particle effects happening like this, and it feels like that's doing increased damage. I don't know. But I pumped 3 or 4 shotgun shells into her, And every time she retreats back into a neutral state, she always goes into the animation of spinning around and going into her flying phase. And Miranda only has access to the flying phase. She does not have access to the spider phase. And she doesn't try to attack you in the normal phase. So all she has to work with is the flying phase. But this one right here, Miranda will act like a shark or like a dolphin, and she'll bounce around twice, and then on the third bounce, she will bounce towards you, but you can interrupt that move with the Mega Mycete attack, which is really well designed. And so you're able to stun her, deal some more damage to her. And this right here, if she's getting into a position where she's trying to get close to you and do the wing attack on you, you can counter that with the Mega Mycete, and you'll want to use your White Sage to restore your Mega Mycete abilities. And yeah, the White Sage is put to really good use here in this entire boss fight. It is awesome. And what's she doing? So it looks like she's on to the next phase. Yeah, so Carcinogen SCA said that you can use your Mega Mycete attack to stop her when she goes into that phase transition animation where she's initiating what Carcinogen SCA calls the Bullets from Hell phase. I mean, this move isn't so bad. So it works in a pattern. So Miranda will fire in a straight line, so you just gotta dodge 3 times, and then for this part right here, Miranda's going to spin her projectiles around, so you've got to time your dodge perfectly. This isn't so bad because you can easily get into the rhythm of when you're supposed to dodge this move, and you do get iframes when you dodge, which is really well designed. Like I said, like there's so many old Capcom designs put into this fight, and it's incredible. Oh, this move right here, you got to be very far away from Miranda because when you're dodging and you're close to her, you do not have a lot of time to dodge her charge attack after the 3rd projectile. If you're far away, you will have time to do that. And whenever she does that move, she will always emerge from the ground, and then you can punish her with the Mega Mycete. So I'm going to use more White Sage. I'm going to pump some more pistol shots into her. When she spins like this, in order to get back into the flying phase, you cannot interrupt her with the Mega Mycete. So you got to wait until she gets out of the animation before she will be stunned by the Mega Mycete. You can also use R1 to stun Miranda by just holding the reticle over her, but it takes a while to do, and she can fly all over the place a lot. So it's just better to use the Mega Mycete attack in order to deal with her, and just use your White Sage to replenish your abilities. But this is the end of the fight. I've done it. So I've fully depleted Miranda's health. It cues this part where you're going to take mandatory damage because this is all part of the scripted encounter with this final part of the fight. And you'll regenerate back to full health. Ethan will give some of his abilities to Rose, and you will be able to stop Miranda's onslaught, and then you'll be able to crystallize her and fully end her consciousness. Like, she is just wiped from existence. And this concludes this amazing final boss fight. What a shame that the rest of the DLC couldn't have been of the same quality as this final boss fight. This final boss fight against Miranda is incredible. It is really good. This is really the only time in this DLC where I felt like the true Resident Evil emerged. Like, old Capcom really delivered with this part of the game. This is what I'm expecting from Resident Evil, with these kind of fights, with these kind of interesting mechanics. But sadly, this doesn't fall in line with the vision new Capcom has for the future of Resident Evil. And if they seriously think that the Shadows of Rose DLC is a perfect reference point for their future model for Resident Evil, then they are seriously deluding themselves. But this is the end of my full DLC walkthrough of the Shadows of Rose DLC on hardcore difficulty, with no damage, no crafting, no weapon parts, and I'm gonna say no save as well. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.